I found out my husband was secretly gambling away our savings for years, right when I was about to surprise him with news that I'm pregnant with our first child. I never thought I'd be the one writing something like this, but here I am. I guess when life throws you curveballs, you just have to roll with it, even if it knocks you down in ways you never expected. This all started a few months ago, but it's taken me until now to process everything and feel like I can even talk about it. My husband Jake and I have been together for 7 years, married for 5. On the surface, we've had a great relationship. Sure, like any couple, we've had our ups and downs, but I've always felt like we could work through anything. He's my best friend, or at least I thought he was. We both had decent jobs, a nice home, and we'd been talking about starting a family for the past year. Honestly, I thought we were finally ready. We'd been putting money aside, slowly but surely, and when I found out I was pregnant, I was ecstatic. I wanted to surprise Jake in a big way. I had all these plans to tell him, balloons, a cute little onesie, the whole deal. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he found out. But before I got the chance to share my news, things started getting weird. It was small stuff at first. Jake seemed more stressed than usual, constantly on edge and distant in a way I couldn't quite explain. He'd come home late, claiming he had extra work. But when I asked him about it, he was vague. Our conversations became shorter, and even when we were together, it felt like he wasn't really there. One night I was going through our mail, and I found a credit card statement that didn't make sense. It was a card I didn't even know we had, and the charges? There were thousands of dollars spent at casinos, online betting sites, and some other sketchy places I didn't recognize. My heart dropped into my stomach. I thought, there has to be a mistake. I mean, Jake wasn't a gambler, at least not that I knew of. He'd mentioned going to the casino a few times with his friends for fun, but that was years ago and I never thought it was serious. I confronted him about it that night and the look on his face told me everything. He couldn't even hide it. His face turned pale and he stammered out excuses, but the truth came out. Jake had been gambling for years, and I had no idea. All those nights he said he was working late, all those random expenses that he shrugged off as work stuff, it was all a lie. He was in deep, really deep. He admitted he had taken out several credit cards in his name, maxed them out, and even dipped into our joint savings account to cover his losses. The money we had been saving to start a family, the money we'd worked so hard to set aside for our future, it was all gone. I remember standing there in the middle of our living room, feeling like the floor had been ripped out from under me. How could I not have seen this coming? How could I not have noticed? Jake kept saying he was sorry, that he was going to stop, that he'd get help. But I didn't even know what to say. I was in shock. And the worst part, I was still pregnant. I hadn't told him yet. I didn't know how. How could I possibly bring a child into this mess when everything I thought I knew about my life had just crumbled? I didn't tell him that night. I couldn't. Instead, I told him I needed space. I went to stay with my sister for a few days, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. My mind was racing. Should I stay with him? Could I trust him again? What about the baby? For the first time in our relationship, I didn't feel like we were partners. I felt like I was alone, facing this huge decision without the person who was supposed to be my teammate. I wanted to believe he could change. I wanted to believe he meant it when he said he would stop gambling, but I was so angry, so hurt, and so scared for our future. A few days later, I finally went back home to talk to Jake. I needed answers. I needed to know the full extent of what was going on because if I was going to make any decision about our future, I needed to know the truth. When I walked back into our house, the atmosphere felt different. Jake looked exhausted. He had bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept since I left. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at his hands. When he saw me, he stood up quickly like he wasn't sure if he should hug me or stay where he was. I didn't move. I just stood there, waiting for him to say something. He opened his mouth, then closed it, like he was trying to figure out where to start. Eventually, I broke the silence. I need you to tell me everything, I said, my voice calm but firm. No more lies, no more half-truths. I need to know exactly how deep this goes. Jake nodded slowly and sat back down. I joined him at the table, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. He started from the beginning, telling me how it all started as something small, a few bets here and there, just for fun. But it didn't stay small. The thrill of winning got to him, and before he knew it, he was hooked. He told me about how he'd been using his own money at first, but when he started losing, he turned to credit cards. At first it was just one, then two, then more. He thought he could win it all back, that he could fix everything before I noticed. But the losses kept piling up, and soon he was in way over his head. That's when he started dipping into our savings. I felt sick. All that money we had worked so hard to save, gone, all because of his addiction. I couldn't even look at him as he told me about the times he almost confessed, but then convinced himself he could fix it without me ever knowing. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear I thought I could handle it. I thought I could stop." I didn't know what to say. The anger and betrayal I felt were overwhelming, but I also felt a deep sadness for him. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the man I thought I knew. He was drowning, and I hadn't even seen it. "What about now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's your plan now?" Jake looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know. I want to stop. I really do. But it's hard. It's like every time I think I'm done, something pulls me back in." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Jake, we can't live like this. I can't live like this. I need to know you're going to get help." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "I will. I'll go to meetings, therapy, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." It was the first time I had seen him truly vulnerable. He wasn't trying to justify what he had done. He wasn't making excuses. He was just scared. And that scared me too. "I haven't told you something," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I was going to tell you before all of this happened, but now I don't know how." Jake looked confused, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm pregnant," I said softly. His eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at me in shock. "You're pregnant?" I nodded, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes. "I was going to surprise you, but then everything happened, and I didn't know what to do." Jake's face crumpled, and he buried his head in his hands. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was going to be okay. But the other part of me didn't know if it was going to be okay. I didn't know if I could trust him again, or if we could make it through this. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I could see how much this was tearing Jake apart, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that he had betrayed me in such a deep and hurtful way. Eventually, I stood up. "I need some time to think." Jake didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and watched as I walked out the door. I spent the next few days at my sister's house, trying to make sense of everything. The weight of the situation pressed down on me like a boulder I couldn't shake. I was pregnant, and the father of my child had lied to me for years, gambling away our future. How could I move forward from this? How could I bring a child into this mess, not knowing if Jake would ever truly change? My sister Emma tried to comfort me, but even she didn't have the answers. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," she said softly, rubbing my back as I sat on her couch, staring at the floor. "Take your time. You'll figure out what's best for you and the baby." But that was the problem. I didn't know what was best. Every time I thought about leaving Jake, I felt a pang of guilt. I had loved him for so long. Could I really just walk away from our life together? From the man I had planned to build a family with? But staying with him felt equally impossible. I couldn't shake the feeling that the trust between us was broken beyond repair. On the third day, Jake texted me. I stared at my phone, my heart racing as I read the message. "I've started going to therapy," he wrote. "I know it's not much, but I wanted you to know that I'm serious about getting help. I'm doing this for us. Please come home." For a brief moment, hope flickered inside me. Maybe he really was trying to change. Maybe this could be the start of something better. But then the anger and doubt came rushing back. Was this just another promise he couldn't keep? Was he saying what he thought I wanted to hear, just to make everything seem okay again? I showed the text to Emma, unsure of what to do. "What if he's serious this time?" I asked, my voice shaky. "What if he's really trying?" Emma sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Only you can decide if you're willing to give him another chance. But whatever you choose, make sure it's what you want, not what you think you should do." Her words stuck with me. What did I want? Not just for Jake or for the baby, but for myself? Did I want to fight for this relationship, or had too much damage been done? That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Memories of my life with Jake flashed through my mind. Our first date, our wedding day, the lazy Sundays we spent lounging on the couch. There was so much love between us, so much history. But there was also a darkness I couldn't ignore. By the time the sun came up, I knew I had to face him. I needed to hear him out, to see for myself if there was a future worth salvaging. When I returned home, Jake was waiting for me on the porch. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. As soon as I got out of the car, he rushed toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "I don't know what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to hear you out. I need to understand where we go from here." He nodded, his face etched with guilt. "I've started therapy. I'm going to meetings. I'm doing everything I can to get better." I crossed my arms, feeling a mix of emotions. Why now? Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Why did you wait until everything was falling apart? Jake looked down at his feet, shuffling nervously. "I don't know. I guess I was scared. I didn't want to admit that I had a problem. I thought I could fix it on my own, but I was wrong." I sighed, my mind racing. "You lied to me, Jake, for years. You took our savings, you put us in debt. How am I supposed to trust you again?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with remorse. I know I messed up, but I swear to you, I'm trying. I'm going to fix this. I love you, and I love our baby. I want to be a better man for both of you." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the doubt lingered in the back of my mind, nagging at me. How could I trust him when he had hidden so much from me? How could I be sure this wasn't just another empty promise? "I'm not going to make any decisions right now," I said finally, my voice firm. "You need to prove to me that you can change, and until then, we're going to take things slow." Jake nodded, his shoulders sagging in relief. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just please, don't give up on us." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past him and into the house, feeling the weight of the decision I'd just made. Taking things slow was the only option I had right now. I couldn't just forgive and forget, but I also couldn't walk away. Not yet. As the weeks passed, Jake continued going to therapy and meetings, but I kept my distance emotionally. I needed time to heal, to figure out if I could ever trust him again. And as my belly grew, so did the uncertainty about our future. As the weeks turned into months, I watched Jake from a distance. He was doing all the right things, going to therapy regularly, attending his meetings, and even starting to pay down the debt he had racked up. He stopped coming home late and seemed genuinely committed to changing. But no matter how hard he tried, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had permanently shifted between us. Every time he hugged me or tried to be affectionate, I flinched, not because I didn't love him, but because the trust we once had felt shattered. I couldn't forget the lies, the deception, or how deeply he had hurt me. And now, with the baby on the way, the pressure to make a decision about our future weighed heavier on my shoulders than ever. I confided in Emma more than anyone during that time. She came over often, and we'd sit on the porch sipping tea while I vented about everything that was swirling through my mind. One afternoon, as I nervously caressed my growing belly, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me since this whole nightmare started. Do you think I'm making a mistake by staying? I asked, barely above a whisper. Emma paused, looking at me with concern. I think you're doing what you need to do to figure things out. But no one can tell you what's right for you, only you know that. She placed her hand on mine. If you think there's still something worth fighting for, then fight. But if you're staying out of fear, that's something you need to think about. Her words stuck with me. I had been so focused on making things work because I was afraid of what leaving would mean for me, for the baby, for our family. But was that a good enough reason to stay? Was I trying to save something that was already too broken? Jake, to his credit, was patient. He didn't pressure me for answers. He gave me the space I needed, even though I could tell he was desperate to make things right. I appreciated his effort, but every time I looked at him, I was reminded of the betrayal, and it tore me apart. As my due date approached, the reality of what was about to happen hit me like a freight train. I was going to be a mother of 2, and I still didn't know if I wanted Jake to be a part of that future. The thought of raising 2 children alone terrified me, but so did the idea of raising them in a home where trust had been fractured. One evening, Jake came home from a therapy session and sat down next to me on the couch. He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and hope, his hands fidgeting in his lap. I know you're still not sure about us, he said quietly, and I don't blame you. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm not going to stop trying to be a better person. I want to be a good father to our children. Even if you decide you can't stay with me, I'll respect that. I just hope we can figure this out. Tears welled up in my eyes. It was the most honest, vulnerable thing he had said in months. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't have to decide right now. I didn't have to have all the answers. I could take things one day at a time, and that was okay. I'm scared, I admitted, wiping the tears from my cheeks. I'm scared of what the future looks like, whether we stay together or not. But I don't want to make any rash decisions. Jake nodded, his expression softening. I understand, and I'm here for whatever you need. In the days leading up to the birth of our child, I allowed myself to take a step back from the pressure of making a final decision. I focused on preparing for the baby, on making sure I was emotionally ready for what was to come. Jake was there, supporting me through it all, but I made it clear that I needed time before we could talk about the future. When our second child, a baby boy, was born, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and responsibility. Looking down at him, I realized that whatever happened between Jake and me, I was strong enough to handle it. Whether I stayed or left, I knew I could be the mother I needed to be. Jake was there, holding our son, tears streaming down his face as he looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. I didn't have the answers then, but I knew we would find them in time. I wasn't ready to give up on us entirely, but I also wasn't ready to forgive. So for now, I'm taking things one step at a time. Jake is working hard to rebuild the trust he shattered, and I'm focusing on being the best mother I can be. Maybe we'll make it through this, maybe we won't. But what I do know is that I'm stronger than I thought, and no matter what happens, I'll be okay.